Hello, hello, hello. This is society's derelict. The scum, the trash, the dirtbag. So, I recently came across this essay, and I thought it would be an interesting thing to read and disseminate. So, this essay is A Case for the Separation of Economy and State by the last individual. We'll get right into it. Separation of Church and State. My fellow countrymen, in the time of yore, the tyranny of Britain and our forefathers were oppressed by a lofty government with no care but their own treasury and power. This led to malfeasance in the treatment of the individual for the interests of the state, an age-old phenomenon evidenced by the millennia of death and destruction of mind and life spanning over the entire human history. As a consequence, the individuals of our great nation, despite the tyranny of the status quo, revolted. Amongst the many abuses to the individual and his inherent characteristic endowed in his existence, the most dominant was the abuse of man's mind. The censure of Thomas Hobbes and the irrationality of the justification of the censure, due to the ideas of providence, plagues, and happenstance, is an example of the censure that was abused by the state. Page 48, the Cambridge Companion to Hobbes' Leviathan. The vested interest within the state and its union with the Church of England caused even more oppression over the minds of the unfree people of the Proto-America. This eventually gave rise to the tenets behind the separation of church and state, so that man may be unmolested due to disagreements between the dominating ethics that influence politics, religion. So man may pursue happiness with his own intellect, irrespective of the state's doctrine. Happiness is a state of non-contradictory joy, a joy without penalty or guilt, a joy that does not clash with any of your values and does not work for your own destruction. Page 17, The Virtue of Selfishness by Ayn Rand. Living under the oppression of the British Church and having Proto-American religion and its practice oppressed is antithetical to the pursuit of one's own values. Another manifestation of this oppression came in the form of inhibition of the pursuit of property, namely in the flagrant and arbitrary taxation to enrich the treasury of the state, for whatever desires the state arbitrarily defines. Under the old parliamentary monarchy, property of individuals were not differentiated from a property of the state, besides freedom in usage and production of said property, if any. Despite this sharing the same roots as the oppression of the individual's mind, the oppression of the individual's property was not seen as important to separate from the state. Therein lies the problem of the American experiment, the problem that we face today that threatens to destroy individual liberty under the guise of economic well-being of the public. The case. In the conception of the federal constitution and the debates that eventually won over the Confederalists, our forefathers in their archaic sight made the initial and common fallacy of subjugation of the economy. The economy, which has the individual as the base unit of productivity, measured over an aggregate and a percentage of that aggregate to be subordinated to the state as means of accruing revenue for the function of the state. I quote, "The prosperity of commerce is now perceived and acknowledged by all enlightened statesmen to be the most useful as well as the most productive source of national wealth." Federalist Paper 12. By the national wealth, as they understood, this meant wealth of the state. Understanding the state to be a parasitic entity that requires nourishment of and by the people. Our forefathers deliberated heavily on such issues, even coming to conclusions such as the genius of the people will ill brook the inquisitiveness and peremptory spirit of excise laws. The pockets of the farmers, on the other hand, will reluctantly yield but scanty supplies in the unwelcome shape of impositions on their houses and lands, and personal property is too precarious and invisible a fund to be laid hold of in any other way than by the imperceptible agency of taxes on consumption. Federalist Paper 12. In the overwhelming interest of the state's necessity to accrue revenue, and therefore maintain sovereignty, a tedious balance was deliberated to hold back the oppressive measures due to lack of popular support and the objective difficulty to impose such oppressive measures. This led to the argument for the Federalists to claim the superiority in revenue generation at behest of being easier able to tax and control foreign trade entering the Union. However, the forefathers did not live long enough to see the wealth and innovation as seen today. They had no room for deliberation upon the checks and balances needed between the state's vested interest in accruing wealth and its necessity to steal wealth from individuals, i.e., private property. The very thing endowed as an inalienable right, produced by the pursuit of happiness through one's productive capacity and intellect, the sucker sustaining man's life on earth. This oppression has manifested in a new shape and form in modern times. This shape is a shape that permeates all American lives: the welfare state, the mixed economy, the socialist controls on trade, and the belligerency of antitrust, the scorn for the pursuit of property. One of Americans' fundamental inalienable rights. The hand that shapes the forms of scorn and oppression is the state, and its union with the economy has not been corrected. There's no such thing as just pilfering of someone else's coffers in order to fill another's. This is state condoned banditry. No choice, no option, under the threat of force, which the state has just and constitutional monopoly on. We must separate the state and economy. Capitalism has been the martyr and bears the weight of our sins and folly, despite the origination of modern pain being derived from anything but capitalism. Sponsored by the capitalists of North Las Vegas. So that's the essay that I stumbled upon, and I think it's actually pretty good. I think this is like a kind of good start to making that case, and this nice, concise, and lays down some rationale, not complete rationale, but when you're trying to make a short essay, you can only do so much. So that is all. Farewell. I hope you have a terrible day. I hate you. Bye.